Thanks everyone for joining. Hope everyone's well and getting back to kind of a normal life. Yes, Darren, it's a turtleneck. Sorry about that. This is our first, what we call a rev up, a digital session in Australia and New Zealand. Again, thanks for everyone for joining. Today we're going to have our client and super user Matt Fern, who's a digital engineering manager in Stowe Australia. We're also going to have our own Luke Johnson, our implementation director, and myself take you through a few things. The agenda is simple. Matt will take us through the impact on design and site teams within Stowe and talk a little bit about stakeholder management, collaboration, and continual learning. We'd like to organize this as a discussion, not just a one-way conversation. So I'm encouraging everyone to ask questions. At the bottom of your Zoom window, you should see a Q&A. So I've just asked you guys not to use the chat so we can keep all the questions in one spot so we don't miss anything. So we can just ask your questions as you go in Q&A. Also, if you are keen for your voice to be heard, or even if you want to share something, feel free to let us know in the chat and I'll allow you to speak. That makes sense. And then after our presentation and discussion with Matt is done, Luke will take over and will show us a 10-minute sneak peek of Revizto 5.0. Some of you might have seen that already in a couple of the previous webinars we ran. And since then, obviously, we've been working very hard and we've been introducing new features and just want to update you on a few new things within the 5.0 and the progress. And basically, that's it. What I'm going to do now, Matt, is I'll stop sharing my screen and allow you to share your screen and start with your part of the presentation. And
thanks, Vlad.
No problem. So I was just going to
just getting things back here. There we go. Thanks very much for that and the opportunity to present on how we're using Revizto at Stowe. Just before I quickly jump in, I just thought I'd mention a little bit about Stowe Australia if you weren't familiar with us. Stowe Australia is an Australian-owned and operated electrical communications contractor, and we've been in operation since 1910. We are Australia's largest privately owned electrical contractor. One of the industry leaders in large complex design and construction projects, which we pride ourselves on. And over 1,500 full-time staff, over 400 apprentices in 14 office locations. Now, with over 1,500 staff located nationally, our office staff are only the tip of the iceberg. The majority of our staff are located on site, so we needed to work out a way to disseminate information to all team members, regardless of their location. Stowe offers a variety of service offerings, and similar consideration to our staff locations had to be given to these operations to collaborate and disseminate accurate and current information to all. The best way to accomplish this, for us anyway, was to move to a cloud-based solution wherever possible. Utilizing BIM 360, regardless of whether the external design team was or not, allowed a much more efficient and close to live access to data for our internal stakeholders. And of course, external as well on an as-needed basis. Among other tools and internal workflows, Revizto fits well in this solution for us. Now, our choice to utilize Revizto as a business as usual approach allows our internal stakeholders access to model and sheet data in a simple to use manner. We choose to utilize Revizto even when the project is being delivered via 2D DWG files and the model data is very limited. Revizto is one of the tools we use at Stowe to increase engagement, collaboration, resolution, and continual learning. Now, increasing the engagement of our staff into our BIM data is essential for its overall accuracy, constructability, and ultimately its return on investment. One of the simplest ways we've been able to increase this is simply being able to provide access via iPads, which Revizto excels at. For our engagement, providing the opportunity for all our stakeholders to engage with our BIM models, and not just our project managers, engineering, and modeling teams, but providing earlier access to our virtual construct allows us to capture the lessons learned and constructability advice from our supervisors, leading hands, tradesmen, apprentices, etc., at a time when the design can economically accommodate. So what we want to do is provide, using Revizto, we allow the maximum opportunity for internal engagement to our BIM. And encouraging our, we call them non-traditional stakeholders, early access can give us that early advice that might not traditionally be provided until it's actually into construction. As I said, with our different service offerings around the group, providing access to this data for our engineering teams, constructability, safety and design, estimating, all those different groups within the business can access the same data. We are ultimately trying to achieve a single point of truth. Revizto, as you know, allows access not just to the model data, but to the 2D sheets. Now, we go beyond just pushing in the sheets of the project itself, but we'll create what we call working drawings. And being able to provide whatever information is in the model that our site teams might require, that doesn't necessarily need to be a formally issued document. But with the workflows that are already established within Revizto, it's much easier just to create our working drawings and push those sheets directly into it like we would with any others. BIM 360 is probably one of the keys for us to getting the most efficient use out of Revizto, especially when it comes to engagement, when we have the other disciplines involved as well. While we will utilize it without it, we will even push up other documentation as required so we can still utilize the cloud-based solutions. I've put in a quote before that I've said, but Revizto provides the transparency we need to our documented works, 2D or 3D. We recognize that any effort spent in the virtual environment to solve an individual's project's unique challenges is a more cost-effective solution than potentially delaying site activities. Ideally, the cost of one person's time versus potentially a team of 40. Now, when we talk about collaboration in Revizto, it is another tool that we can use to get our message across. And we're not just talking audio and visual communication. While it's useful, visual communication tool to demonstrate to our internal and external stakeholders is essential. Going beyond just a printed 2D sheet of paper, but being able to demonstrate in a modeled environment, either on site or in a meeting room or wherever you are, with a combination of a portable device. Ideally, we have all that data at hand. Again, combining with a cloud-based solution, we can provide a team close to live shared information. And I say close to live because there is a time there to export and carry on, but it could be maybe about 2 days behind, depending on the size of the project. We have a lot of success with our smaller projects. Of course, they can sync to Revizto much quicker. They could be an overnight if you wanted to, but our larger projects, which could have over 2,000 sheets in the entire project, potentially, they can take a little bit more time. Providing access via Revizto and a regular sync allows our current project and documentation status to be shared internally. Our project managers can see at a relative glance where they're at when it comes to the documentation. Our site teams can see where different areas are being progressed or where things are potentially changing. One thing I'll note is, as part of our internal QA process, we just cover the use of Revizto and regard it as a perpetual work in progress. So we will still rely on the whatever the project might set in place, but generally it seems to be Aconex. We will still rely on that formalized issue of documents to create our construction documentation, of course. But as far as a work in progress, up-to-date information, Revizto is correct. As you know, when you're utilizing especially Revit to produce your documentation, it's very rare that the model will actually be out of sync to the rest of it. This also provides a cloud solution to site access. Our internet access generally is not too bad, depending on where you are. We actually have more problems if you're working in at construction sites, which end up looking like a bunker, reduces it. But Revizto, of course, can download completely to the device, so it can operate without constant internet access. Now, when it comes to resolving or resolutions, providing the workflows to identify, assign, action, and record the project issues in a manner that can be measured and quantified, well, this provides a level of accountability essential to the success of our many varied projects. Now, Revizto obviously excels at resolutions or providing the function via their issues. I can't say I greatly appreciate the terminology of issue. It sometimes brings negative connotations. However, it can provide more than just a coordination resolution. This is where a lot of the progress we can make on site when it comes to the creation of issues occurs. Now, we've created a bunch of stamps that allows for quick development of these and standardization across the project. Some of the ones we use it for, which may or may not have been traditionally considered, is things like using the functions for progressive as-builts, creating issues that we can track later as the team develops the project, means that our as-built documentation can be developed as the teams progress. as opposed to potentially, I don't know, 2 weeks later, sitting in a lunchroom and trying to remember potentially what occurred. This allows that documentation to occur as it happens. It automatically assigns to our modeling and drafting teams, and we can actually track via the issues how many outstanding as-built modifications are required. That, of course, goes hand in hand with potentially a room inspection or sign-off. If the room is completed as per the documentation, then we can internally tick that off. Now, that is just as important to us as seeing a room with modifications, because it means it's looked at, and we can then visualize at a later stage what rooms have been completed to the point of a sign-off being able to be completed. We have other stamps to assist in early reviews for safety and design, which can just highlight those issues by our respective assigned people who will specifically look for these things. But we can then group all those potential issues all together. Use of the stamp feature within Revizto makes this process much, much easier. And then, of course, standardizes it between projects. The one lesson I've learnt, especially because we will use this internally and with other groups as well, is if you are creating stamps, put your business name at the front. It makes it much easier when you start to then work with others, because otherwise, if you've all got a coordination stamp, everyone's will look the same. So it's much easier if you want to copy a stamp template in, put your business name at the front. It makes it much, much easier if you're copying between. And I just saw something pop up then. I just checked whether that was the question, but it's okay. I'll come back to that one. Now, using Revizto as a learning tool is one of my favorite features, one of my personal favorites. Now, my background is actually from a consultancy, and I freely admit that I've got a lot to learn when it comes to the unique challenges of an operating site, that model versus reality situation. Using Revizto, even after a project is completed, allows for our reviews and questions to be asked as a future learning opportunity. I like the feature that coming back to the issues, that photos can be taken directly from site to convey a information back to office staff who might not appreciate what is actually happening on site. There's one example here where a door release needs to be moved because of the stiffeners actually being provided. Now, some of that detail, as you know, inside a model is not quite there yet. The architects, not that I've personally seen, there is a limitation on how much of the internals of the walls you might actually see without referring to a detail. That might improve as Revit specifically develops, but it's a common issue that I have found. The model versus reality situation is another one where constructability, when the construction has been placed, the tolerances between might be out and thus be affecting those elements inside the model, and it becomes harder to measure between each one. Taking advice from that and learning from those, recording those as issues, will hopefully prevent that on future models where we can allow for certain tolerance, effectively expecting that to occur. getting that constructability advice from our, as we've got our supervisors, leading hands, tradesmen and apprentices, allows that communication to come back to what has been a traditional engineering project manager modeling team arrangement, allows that real world constructability advice to actually influence the design. And we can learn from those issues. Now, in turn, it also flips around the other way. Engineering teams can actually provide the advice back or answer questions back to our site personnel. Now, this is often a two-way street. The engineering versus construction can become it's sometimes a heated discussion, but with the ability to be able to communicate so easily on an issue, and especially for it to be recorded, is one of the greatest benefits I see. I saw a question there come through from accessing site on an iPad from Michael. In terms of accessing on site on an iPad, how do you find the performance of the model? Our site teams only run regular iPads, but we've found that most of the projects, resi towers, etc., struggle on these. We have found one iPad Pro, so we've picked this up to trial, and even it can barely cope with our largest projects. Now, I've actually found that one of our the iPad Pros do actually perform quite well. The features within Revizto to reduce its quality can be good. Depending on what you're putting into the model. I mean, one of our biggest projects that we've pushed in at the moment is a full hospital, and using the iPad Pros, it performs perfectly. There's barely any lag or jagging between it. The older iPads, there is a limit. I believe it's something like an Air 2 or something like that. Anything earlier than an iPad Air 2 will struggle on projects. But it does depend on the size. If one solution, which I try to avoid at all times, as much as I possibly can anyway, if reducing the quality using the Revizto settings from the desktop version, if you can't reduce the quality in those enough and an iPad Pro still can't handle it, then simply it has to be split into two projects. Ideally, you don't want to be leaving services out. So and it is generally services that seem to cause the problem. I don't know why. It's probably got something to do with the number of curves, etc. In some of those things. Hydraulics and fire models seem to slow things down for me personally, if they're large enough. But yeah, potentially splitting it into two could be an option. But my first choice would always be to looking at the settings in the desktop version to optimize that for use on an iPad. That generally does fix most problems.
So Matt, if
Yes.
I can just add, because I see there's more people asking about performance for services and stuff. Well, Matt's given his overview of how iPads perform for Stowe, but I suppose every project and every client will have their own specifics. So Luke Johnson and myself are more than happy to address those directly through Zoom meetings with anyone that's got any kind of question or a problem with iPad performance. Just from my own point of view, just an example, I recently loaded a very large hydro project on my iPad that's got quite a few point clouds in and spans around 70 kilometers, and it performs perfectly on my iPad Pro that's 18 months old. It's not even the latest iPad Pro, but obviously the older the iPad, the more the more performance might take a hit, depending on the complexity of the project. So again, we're more than happy to address each and every case directly and suggest a lot of different workarounds that Revizto does have, as Matt mentioned. There are ways to optimize further projects that need to be viewed in the field on iPads or Windows surfaces if the equipment that's used is a little bit slower or out of date, if that makes sense. So we'll just be contacting everyone that's putting those comments after this webinar and just arrange meetings to directly address those. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, nice. I saw another one there, another question there regarding exports with a system with 32 gigs of RAM. Might be something else you can work with there, Vlad. But on the larger projects, it simply takes 64 at a minimum. It needs some decent RAM to actually run an export. I'm not sure. Yeah, where it takes a lot. I'm not sure the technical reasons behind all that. I'm sorry, but on a large project, trying to export anything, well, you know, I'm looking at something at the moment with something like 2,000 sheets. Definitely needs the 64 gigs of RAM at minimum. Ideally, I'd have more, but that is, I don't know how you would resolve it to run with less than that. I think it's just needs to happen.
Cool.
Now I've flown through my own question there, which is all good because I just came up with straight to questions at the end, but I think we've answered quite a few that they've brought up here. But if anyone else had any other questions on how we're utilizing that, I'm more than happy to take any answers, or if you want to take any questions, sorry. But if you want to message me directly, you can, and I'm more than happy to talk to you.
I've got a couple of questions, Matt.
Yes.
One refers to the process you mentioned around Revizto being exclusively a work in progress platform, which it's basically built to be. And obviously, just like most of our other clients, you still utilize Aconex or the likes for formal submissions. My question around that would be just if you could comment a little bit around how Revizto helps the efficiency of that formal process through that work in progress coordination, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Now it very much does. I mean, we, for various for either internal QA reasons, or it could be a project specific requirement. And I found this with most projects where Aconex is the point to refer to. By establishing that work in progress sort of model, the team can actually reference a lot of information. And if they've found something they do need to clarify, or something that provides inconsistency between data, and, you know, classic point for us is the location of things like GPOs compared to architects, for example. We can get that can be highlighted quite quickly in the model. When it becomes, if it's deemed to be an issue, we can then refer to the Aconex documentation, or find the corresponding Aconex documentation to back that up. But the ability for it to find that information in the first place is great. If you were just relying on Aconex alone, you are looking through, well, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know where the sheets are. You might not know the area. Our sort of what we call our model discovery workshops, which the idea is to simply have a look through the model and the status of the model and have a general chat. They help raise issues that you might not necessarily have found. I mean, Aconex, like it or love it, you're stuck with it at the moment. But you receive, you know, I don't know, potentially 10 transmittals a day. The information gets lost. Revizto helps consolidate that, into one area, greatly improving the efficiency before having to randomly search through Aconex documentation. I think you're muted there, Vlad.
sorry, I thought I muted myself. I was just going to ask, do you see your teams sometimes use both in parallel? Like formal reviews need to be submitted through Aconex, but on the side using Revizto for actual 2D and 3D reference and exploration before they submit a formal review?
Very much so. I mean, because they've got access to that, all the information in one spot, and being able to, especially with the sheets feature of Revizto, being able to see, you know, where does this information show on a variety of sheets? That works very well. So our site teams can actually review much more up-to-date information via Revizto than they can necessarily on Aconex. With combination of BIM 360, the models are updated, potentially daily. So they're usually much more up-to-date and current than Aconex documentation generally is, depending on the project. It's a very project-specific thing. I've seen some insist on a weekly transmittal to Aconex. Others will only do it at milestone issues. The problem with those milestone issues is that they could potentially be weeks or months between delivery, in which case some pretty substantial changes could occur within the model. So yeah, providing that information in the model, being able to access it much quicker, is easier. It sometimes gets a bit tricky when you're negotiating with access to push some of that information. If you want to access work in progress information, it's best to acknowledge that you are accessing that and have those actual discussions with your team. That is very much helped me in the past, especially when you're utilizing BIM 360. I mean, the information is there already. So whatever's being published onto BIM 360, we generally reference as work in progress.